You ever realize too late that you've been the joke in someone else's story? My name's Howard. I'm 68 years old, or at least I was the day this all started, retirement day. I'd worked 39 years at the same logistics company, 34 of those in the warehouse and 5 more in the office, after my knees decided they'd had enough lifting other people's burdens. Funny, right? The body gives out just around the same time they hand you a plaque and a slice of dry sheet cake, and send you on your way like you're a used mop. I always figured I'd go out quiet. No fuss, no speeches. Just sign the papers, clean out my desk, and take the bus home like it was any other Thursday. But my daughter insisted. "You deserve a party, Dad," she said, all sweetness and good intentions. "Everyone's going to be there. We'll make it special." I believed her. That's the worst part. I genuinely believed her. To understand how I got here, you need to know a little about my family. My wife, Marlene, passed away 10 years ago. Cancer. Quick, mean kind. I'd met her when I was 22 and never looked at another woman after. She was the kind of person who made a room softer just by walking into it. After she was gone, I poured myself into my work and into raising our daughter, Ava. She was 26 at the time, newly married to a man named Chad. Yes, really, Chad, who sold insurance and wore sunglasses indoors. I gave him the benefit of the doubt at first. I figured he was just one of those guys who pretends to be confident because he's terrified of not measuring up. I tried to bond with him, offered to help when they bought their first house, even co-signed on their second car when their credit wasn't quite there. I never once brought it up, never made them feel like they owed me. That's not how I was raised. Ava had always been my soft spot. She took after her mom in the looks department. Same warm smile, same steady eyes, but she had a hard edge to her too, one I didn't always recognize. When she was little, she'd run to me with skinned knees, and I'd scoop her up and tell her stories about brave little girls who outsmarted dragons. She'd listen with her chin on my shoulder, nodding like it all made sense. I missed that little girl. I missed her even as I watched her grow into someone I didn't always understand. So when she said they were planning a party, I said yes. Not because I wanted a celebration, but because I thought, maybe stupidly, that it was a gesture of love. One last moment before I disappeared into the background of their lives. I even went out of my way to make it nice. I bought a stack of personalized gifts for the staff I'd worked with, handwritten notes for the ones who'd stayed late with me during inventory crunches, and a little engraved watch for Ava, something her mother had picked out years ago and asked me to give her when she was ready. I guess I thought retirement day qualified. The party was in the break room. Someone taped up a crooked banner that said, "Congrats, Howie," in red marker. I hate being called Howie. Always have. My name's Howard. You don't spend nearly 4 decades showing up early, working overtime without complaint, and training every green kid who walks through the door just to be remembered like the office mascot. But I didn't say anything. I smiled. I nodded. I shook hands and thanked people who barely looked me in the eye. Then I saw the cake. It was one of those sheet cakes from the grocery store, white icing, way too much food coloring in the blue letters. It read, "Finally useless," with a little plastic figure of a guy in a rocking chair next to it. Everyone laughed, like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Even Chad. Especially Chad. He clapped and hooped like he was at a comedy show. "Guess you're really off the payroll now, huh?" he said, elbowing me in the ribs. "Hope you saved enough for bingo nights." I stood there, holding a paper plate and a plastic fork, my face doing that thing where it forgets whether to smile or cry. Ava didn't say anything. She just snapped a photo of the cake and posted it on her story with a laughing emoji. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded like it was all in good fun. Then I made the rounds. I handed out the gifts I'd brought, gave the warehouse guys each a pocket knife with their initials on it. Told Denise from payroll I'd finally give her back her stapler. She laughed, bless her. Even gave my old floor manager, Rick, a bottle of the whiskey he liked, even though we'd barely spoken in the last year. Then I gave Ava the watch. She looked confused. "What's this?" "Your mother wanted you to have it," I said quietly. "She picked it out before you know." A pause. A shrug. "Thanks, Dad." Just thanks. No hug. No tearful moment. Just a thanks, like I'd handed her a pair of socks. Then she went back to her phone. I cleaned up the party myself. Threw away the plates. Took down the banner. Wiped the tables. And when it was all done, I stood there in the empty break room, holding the last slice of that awful cake, and I realized I didn't want to go home. Not the house. Not the street where no one waved anymore. Not to the silence that used to be filled with Marlene's humming while she made tea. Not to the mailbox full of bills and charity letters. Not to the family that called when they needed things, but never to check how I was sleeping. So that night, I went to the bank. Emptied the account. Every last cent. I left a note on the kitchen counter. Nothing dramatic. Just a line, "Gone fishing." And then I vanished. No phone. No social media. I didn't even take my car. And for a whole month, I was free. Until yesterday, when I saw a public post on some community board a teenager had left open at the cafe where I was washing dishes for cash. "Grandpa, if you're reading this, we had no idea. Please come home." And suddenly the freedom didn't feel so simple anymore. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to hear the rest. How we got from a birthday cake to this post. Because it didn't start with the party. That was just the final straw. It started way before. With a lie. And a dinner. And the day I realized my daughter didn't see me as her father anymore. She saw me as her backup plan. And trust me, that changed everything. If I had to pinpoint the exact moment the shift began, when I stopped being a father and started being useful, I guess, it would be Ava and Chad's 3rd anniversary dinner. It was supposed to be a celebration. I remember because I just paid off the final loan on the house, and for once, I felt like I could breathe without checking my wallet first. Ava had called me a few days prior, saying they were having a little get-together at their place. "Just a quiet dinner, Dad. Nothing big. We'd love to have you." I brought wine. A bottle of red Marlene used to like, saved for a special occasion. I even dressed up a little, button-down shirt, slacks, shoes that hadn't seen the light of day since Marlene's funeral. When I rang the doorbell, it was Chad who answered, wearing a polo and loafers like always, his cologne hitting me before his handshake. "Hey, old man," he said with a wink, stepping aside. "Didn't think you'd make it. Didn't think I'd make it." I should have turned around then. The house smelled like takeout and lemon cleaner. Ava was in the kitchen, plating food that clearly wasn't homemade. I didn't mind that. Lord knows I'm no chef. But what got me was how she barely looked up. "Hey, Dad," she said flat. "You want water or wine?" "I brought wine," I said, holding it out. She looked at the bottle like it was a grocery receipt. "Oh, cool. Just put it over there." I set it next to 2 unopened bottles of something imported. Expensive labels. Definitely not for me. Dinner was awkward. Chad spent most of it talking about his new business lead, some multi-level thing that sounded suspiciously like a pyramid scheme, and Ava nodded along like she was proud of him. Every time I tried to ask how her job was going, or how their garden was doing, the subject changed. Fast. Like I was some substitute teacher they were tolerating for the grade. But the moment that really stayed with me came after dessert. We were still at the table, and Chad leaned back, sipping his drink, when he said, "So, Howard, what's your plan for retirement? Got a place picked out? Maybe a little beach condo?" Ava laughed, like it was a joke. "He can't even swim, Chad." I smiled politely. "Just taking it one day at a time. Haven't decided anything yet." Chad raised an eyebrow. "No big plans. I figured you'd be dying to travel. Live it up. Spend all that hard-earned dough." Ava glanced at him, then at me. "Speaking of that, Dad, we were actually wondering if we could talk to you about something." And there it was. The shift. The tilt of the earth you don't notice until you see your own reflection in someone else's expectation. She folded her hands like a bank teller. "We've been thinking about expanding. Maybe getting a bigger place. There's this 4-bedroom just outside of town. Good schools. Bigger yard for when we have kids. But the down payment's kind of steep." Chad jumped in. "It's a great investment, Howard. Real estate's the safest way to grow wealth, you know? And with your credit and savings. I'm not co-signing another loan," I said quietly, not angry yet. Just tired. Ava's smile twitched. "We're not asking you to co-sign. Just maybe help out a little. You said the house is paid off, right? You're in a great spot, Dad. And we're family. We're family." That phrase is a rusty knife. Used only when they need something. I didn't argue. Not then. I just nodded and said I'd think about it. And I did think about it, on the walk home in the dark, because I didn't want to ask them for a ride. I thought about it the next day while I weeded the front yard, and the next week when I saw my neighbor's son, barely 20, screaming at his father on the porch for not paying his car insurance. The world had changed, and maybe I was too slow to see it. But I wasn't going to pay for a house I'd never live in, for a future grandchild I hadn't been trusted to meet yet. I didn't say no outright. I just stopped answering calls for a few days. I thought maybe they'd get the message. They didn't. What came next was a string of smaller things, little paper cuts that didn't bleed until they stacked up. Ava stopped inviting me to dinners. When I dropped by with groceries, because I still remembered what Marlene used to do for our neighbors when they had babies or bad weeks. I'd find the bags untouched days later. When I called to ask if she wanted to go through some old photo albums Marlene had made, she said she was too busy, maybe next month. Then came the will conversation. It was late January, cold enough that the windows sweated when you made tea. I had Ava over for soup. Just her. No Chad. I figured maybe we could reconnect. But 5 spoonfuls in, she said, "Have you updated your will?" I looked up. What? She sipped like it was casual. Just wondering. You know, with retirement and all, it's good to have everything organized. I already have one, I said too quickly. It's all taken care of. She set her spoon down. Does it still have Mom's name on it? Because if it does, that makes things complicated. I stared at her. Your mother's name is on it because we made those decisions together. But she's not here anymore. No, Ava, she's not. But I am. She looked away then. I couldn't tell if it was guilt or strategy. After that, the calls stopped altogether. Months passed. Spring turned into summer. I busied myself with projects, fixing up the shed, organizing old records, volunteering a little at the library. But the silence was deafening. And then came the retirement party. You already know how that went. What you don't know is what happened 2 days after. I got a call from my bank. Ava had tried to access my account. She claimed she was helping me set up automatic bill pay, that I'd forgotten my login and given her permission. But I hadn't. I checked my statements. Nothing was missing, yet, but there were login attempts from her zip code. I didn't confront her. Not right away. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I started writing things down. I made copies of every document, printed out bank statements, changed passwords, made a second set of keys for my safety deposit box, and gave it to the only person I trusted, my old coworker Denise, the one who laughed at my stapler joke and cried when I gave her that gift. Then I watched and waited. Ava finally called me a week later, just to check in. Her voice was syrupy, like the kind you pour on pancakes when you know the bottle's almost empty. "I miss you, Dad," she said. I almost believed her. But then she added, "Chad's cousin is selling a cabin by the lake. Dirt cheap. It'd be a perfect retirement spot for you. We could even help you move in." And that's when I realized it. They wanted me out of my house. Out of the way. Maybe not in a malicious, movie villain way, but in that quiet, insidious way people do when they've decided your best years are behind you, and now you're just inconvenient real estate. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, looking at old photos of Marlene and Ava. Our road trips. Her prom. That Christmas when we couldn't afford gifts, so we made each other hand-drawn coupons instead. I remembered Ava giving me one that said, "Good for one big hug anytime." I still had it, tucked into a book on the shelf. And now she wanted my house. My savings. My silence. The next morning, I started packing. But not for the lake house. Not for the retirement plan she had in mind. I packed the things that mattered. The watch Marlene had given me to give Ava, the photo albums, the journal I'd kept since Marlene got sick, and a USB drive full of documents I didn't trust leaving behind. I sold the car. Quietly. Took cash. I called the bank, told them to close the account on my word only. No exceptions. Gave them a password phrase that only Marlene would have known. That's how I knew I'd never forget it. I didn't tell Ava. Not even when she sent a reminder for the cabin trip the following week. Instead, I waited for the party. Waited for the moment they'd be too distracted by cake and bad jokes to see what was really happening. And when that moment came, when I smiled, cleaned up the tables, handed out gifts, and saw Chad smirking over his drink like he'd won some invisible game, I knew. They had no idea what I'd done. No idea what was coming. No idea what they'd already lost. Because I may be old. I may be retired. But I am not useless. And I was done being quiet. Done being the backup plan. Done being the joke. But first, I had to disappear. Not forever. Just long enough for them to realize what they'd taken for granted. And long enough to make them squirm when the cracks started to show. So I vanished. And the fallout? Let's just say it started small. A missed birthday. A bounce check. A Facebook post. And then something much, much bigger. But I'll get to that. When you leave everything behind, you'd think there'd be a rush of adrenaline, right? Some grand feeling of freedom. Like a movie scene where the wind's in your hair, the music swells, and you're finally in charge of your life again. That's not what happened. Not even close. I left at 4:32 a.m. the morning after my retirement party. I remember the exact time because the old cuckoo clock Marlene loved chirped as I stepped out the door for the last time. I'd packed light, just a duffel bag, a folder with my documents, and a canvas bag with Marlene's watch, the photo albums, and my journal. Everything else stayed behind. The furniture, the houseplants, even the slippers by the door. I wanted it to look like I'd just gone for a walk and never came back. I took a bus heading west. Not because I had a destination. I just needed to be in motion. The first few days were quiet. Numb almost. I stayed at a cheap motel 3 towns over, paid cash, kept my head down. I watched local news, ate cereal straight from the box, and stared at the walls more than I care to admit. At night, I listened to the occasional car drive by and wondered if I'd made a mistake. If maybe, just maybe, I'd misread everything. Maybe Ava wasn't being malicious. Maybe Chad was just an idiot, not a manipulator. Maybe the cake really was a joke. But then I'd think about the way Ava looked through me at dinner. About how quickly she brought up the will. About the login attempts at the bank. No, I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was awake. By the end of the week, the cash from my car sale was already thinning. I hadn't thought much about what came next. I didn't want to go to another city and start over. I wasn't looking for a second act. I just didn't want to spend my final years being treated like an ATM with a heartbeat. I ended up in a little coastal town about 6 hours away. Population under 3,000. Quiet place. Nothing flashy. A boardwalk with a few shops, a diner that smelled like coffee and fried eggs from 6 blocks away, and a public library that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. I rented a room above a bait and tackle shop. The owner, Doug, was a widower around my age with sun-leathered skin and a surprisingly soft voice. I told him I was retired and just passing through, maybe looking for part-time work to keep busy. He didn't ask questions, just handed me a key and said, "Room's clean, sheets are new, don't touch my bourbon." That first month was hard, harder than I thought it'd be. I'd gone from being someone reliable, someone useful, to living in a room with a hot plate and a single chair. I had no phone, no internet, no way to see what Ava or Chad were up to. I told myself that was the point, but the silence started getting to me. Every morning, I walked the shoreline, trying to breathe in something other than regret. I'd see grandfathers tossing pebbles into the water with their grandkids, old couples holding hands, and young parents arguing over sunscreen. And I'd feel it, the ache, the sense that I was standing behind a glass wall, watching a world I used to be part of move on without me. I hit rock bottom on a Tuesday. It was raining. Not the romantic kind of rain you see in novels. This was cold, sideways, miserable rain. I'd been walking without an umbrella like an idiot and got soaked to the bone. When I got back to my room, the power had gone out. Some storm had knocked out a line down the block. So there I was, sitting in the dark, wet socks on linoleum, a can of beans in my hand, and I just lost it. I don't mean tears. I mean full-on what am I doing breakdown. I cried so hard I shook. I wasn't mourning a death. I was mourning myself. The version of me that used to matter. The one Marlene loved. The one Ava used to hug without asking for anything. I stayed like that for hours, until my stomach growled and I realized no one was coming to save me. And that's when something shifted. Not big, not profound, just a quiet, tired realization. If no one was coming, I had to stand up. So I did. The next day, I asked Doug if he knew anyone who needed help. He pointed me toward a local cafe run by a woman named Linda. She was in her 50s, short, sharp, and funny in that way only people who've lived through serious storms can be. She needed someone to wash dishes part-time and clean up after clothes. I told her I wasn't picky. "Can you lift a crate?" she asked. "Barely. Good enough." It wasn't glamorous. I spent my days elbow deep in soap suds and my nights wiping tables. But after a few weeks, I started to feel something again. I'd wake up with purpose. I learned people's names. Linda paid cash. She even let me eat the leftover pastries at night. I didn't tell anyone where I'd come from. Not right away. When people asked, I just said I was retired and needed a change of scenery. That was enough for them. Little by little, I started to rebuild. I bought a used bike. Started biking along the coast in the mornings. I got a library card and read everything I could about history and old rock bands. I filled pages in my journal. And one night, Linda invited me to sit with her after close. She poured 2 mugs of something strong and said, "You look lighter these days." I shrugged. Dish soap'll do that. She smiled. No, it's something else. Like you're carrying less. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. Then she said something I haven't forgotten. You're not the sum of what you left behind, Howard. You're the sum of what you choose to carry forward. That night, I opened the folder I'd brought with me, the one with all the papers, the photos, the old documents. I flipped through every page, and I started tearing. Not the important stuff, just the things that tied me to a version of myself I no longer needed. Printouts of bank statements, letters I never sent, photos where I wasn't smiling. I kept the photos of Marlene, the ones where we were dancing in the kitchen, the one where Ava was on my shoulders at the county fair, the one of all three of us on the front porch, laughing at something no one remembers. And I decided then, I wasn't going back. Not to the house, not to the guilt, not to the role of useful old man who never said no. But I wasn't done with them either, because while I was rebuilding, I'd started noticing something strange. Linda's niece ran the local community board online, and sometimes I'd help her post events. One day, I caught a glimpse of a familiar name, Chad Worthington. He was listed as a new rep for an insurance firm expanding into coastal counties. Same smug headshot, same shark grin. I pretended not to care, but over the next few weeks, I kept seeing it. Ads, posts, mentions. He was building a brand, and I knew he was using the money Ava had squeezed out of me over the years to fund it. I wasn't mad, not in the screaming, table-flipping way. It was something colder, sharper. I started paying attention. I started taking notes. Because while I washed dishes and rode my bike and listened to the waves roll in, I realized I had more power than they ever gave me credit for. I knew where the money came from. I knew the house's deed. I knew every account, every paper trail, every asset. They thought I was gone. They thought I was irrelevant. But I was watching, and I was building. Not just a new life. Not just a new sense of self. I was building a plan. Because when you hit rock bottom, the only direction left is up. And sometimes the best revenge is patience and precision and letting them think they've won, just long enough for the floor to vanish under their feet. And I had just the right tools to pull the rug out. They had no idea, but soon they would. Trust me, when you strip a man down to nothing, you expect him to fold, break, fade into some invisible corner of the world and die quietly. That's what Chad and Ava were betting on, that I'd wander off into the fog like some forgettable old man who didn't know how the world worked anymore. They thought silence meant defeat, but they misunderstood. Silence is strategy. I spent 5 weeks building the new version of myself in secret, washing dishes, eating modestly, paying rent in cash, and letting the local gossip breeze past me like wind through an alley. I became a ghost with fingerprints, present but invisible. And as I rebuilt my sense of self, my purpose, I also began to construct something else. A plan. Revenge, you see, isn't rage. It's not yelling or breaking things. That's too loud, too clumsy. Real revenge is quiet. It waits. It learns. It sets the table for a meal your enemies don't realize they're about to eat. And by the time they taste it, it's already too late to spit it out. I started with knowledge. Because knowledge is power, but more importantly, it's leverage. Back when I was useless, I'd let Ava and Chad run with assumptions. They thought just because I didn't talk about my finances, I didn't have any. That just because I still lived in the old family house, I hadn't invested, diversified, or planned beyond a pension and some dusty savings account. They never asked about the side business I sold in '99, or the silent partnerships I held in 2 small companies, one of which, thanks to a freak spike in pandemic-era demand, had recently gone public. They didn't know about the trust fund Marlene and I had built, not for Ava, but for our future grandkids. One we agreed would only activate if the family stayed together in good faith. They assumed I was comfortable, maybe even modestly secure. They didn't know I was rich, and that, more than anything, was my shield. I spent hours in the back corner of the library, typing carefully on one of their ancient computers. I created a new email address, a virtual mailing address through a forwarding service, and updated the security on every financial account I owned. I locked down my estate, changed beneficiaries, scrubbed Ava's name from everything. Then I called Denise. Denise, my old coworker from the warehouse. The only one who looked me in the eye after that awful party. The one I trusted enough to give a spare key to my safety deposit box. She answered on the first ring. Howard, she said, cautious but warm. Hey, Denise. I'm okay. She burst into tears. We didn't talk long, but long enough for me to confirm what I needed. She'd gotten the letter I left. She hadn't said a word to Ava or anyone else, just like I asked. She'd held onto the backup documents I left her. Copies of my will, trust paperwork, deeds, and a thumb drive with all my passwords. I asked her for one favor. Go by the house, I said. Tell me if anything's changed. The next day, she called back. They've moved in, she said, voice tight. Ava and Chad. They're acting like they own the place. I closed my eyes and breathed in through my nose. They have no deed, I said quietly. I never signed it over. I know, Denise replied. I checked the county records. It's still yours. But they changed the locks. I laughed. For the first time in weeks, I actually laughed. That was their first mistake. Pretending possession was ownership. Their second mistake was underestimating my memory. You see, I remembered everything Ava and Chad had ever asked for, every loan, every favor, every passive-aggressive jab disguised as a joke. I pulled the old receipts and statements from my files and began logging them into a spreadsheet. All the cash gifts they claimed were small, all the investments that turned out to be losses. And then I compared them to the values in the trust fund we'd originally created for Ava's future. Let's just say the math wasn't in her favor anymore. I had the paper trail, but I needed more than documents. I needed people. So I started building a network. It began with Linda, my boss at the cafe. One night after close, I told her everything. Who I really was, what had happened, why I'd disappeared. She didn't blink. Tell me how I can help, she said, pouring us both a drink. I asked her if she'd let me use the cafe as a meeting spot. Nothing shady, just a place I could quietly reconnect with the people who still mattered from my old life. Over the next few weeks, I invited a few select folks to visit me. People Ava and Chad never cared about. People who weren't useful in their world. Old coworkers. A couple of retired warehouse supervisors. The mailman who used to bring Marlene fresh rhubarb from his garden. People with memories. I asked them about Ava. I didn't lead. I just asked. And the stories they told? She hadn't just distanced herself. She'd rewritten history. She said you were sick, one said. She said you were confused. That you weren't making smart decisions anymore. Chad said you'd given them power of attorney. That you didn't want to be bothered. Each story burned deeper than the last. But they were fuel. I pulled up every county record, bank transaction, and trust document I had access to. I cross-checked the date Ava tried to access my bank account with her phone records, which I still had access to via our old family plan account. Yes, she never removed me. Another oversight. And then came the gift from the universe. I found Chad's business listing on a public registry. A new LLC. Registered under my home address. That was mistake number 3. Now they weren't just overreaching. They were sloppy. And it gave me what I needed most. A legal foothold. I scheduled a private appointment with a lawyer named Ruth. She was sharp as a tack and known in the area for handling delicate family disputes. I brought her every document, every printout, every login trail, signature mismatch, and record of verbal misrepresentation I could collect. She listened quietly. Then she looked at me and said, Howard, would you be okay with a little noise? What kind of noise? The kind that gets attention. I smiled. I think it's time. We drafted the paperwork, filed a cease and desist for the LLC tied to my address, sent formal letters demanding immediate vacating of my property, citing unlawful occupation, updated my will to reflect Ava's removal, and established a new trust for any future grandchildren that would bypass their parents entirely, protected from contesting. Then I opened a new account under a shell trust, one that couldn't be tracked to me publicly. I moved most of my assets there. But the cherry on top? I made a few anonymous calls. One to Chad's employer, one to a journalist who covered local business fraud, and one to the city's small business bureau. Just enough to ask questions. Questions like, is it legal to use a stolen home address for an LLC? And, are there any known cases of financial manipulation involving retired relatives? No accusations. Just whispers. Then I waited. Waited as the noise grew. Linda started hearing things from customers. People murmuring at tables. I didn't say a word. Until one day, I got a text. From Ava. It simply read, Did you do this? No context. No greeting. Just raw panic. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because the final piece? The final piece was already in motion. You see, I'd made one more quiet visit. Disguised, of course. Glasses, beard, a borrowed cap from Doug's shop. Just enough to blend in. I went by the house. My house. The lawn was overgrown. Packages sat unopened on the porch. And in the window, I saw Chad pacing. On the phone. Angry. Frustrated. Waving a piece of paper in the air like it was a snake that bit him. I took a photo from across the street. Then I turned and walked away. Because the storm was coming. And they weren't ready for it. But I was. I had everything I needed. The documents. The leverage. The allies. And the receipts. Now, it was just a matter of pulling the trigger. And I knew exactly where. And exactly when. Because while they were busy building castles out of my bones, I was digging tunnels under their foundation. And they never heard me coming. But they would. Very soon. And oh, how sweet that sound would be. Revenge isn't loud. Not the real kind. It doesn't burst through the door with fireworks and shouting. It slips in quietly, sits down at the table, and lets everyone notice, too late, that the seat they thought was theirs has already been pulled out from under them. My moment came on a Thursday. Funny how big moments tend to land on ordinary days. It wasn't a holiday or a birthday or any sort of anniversary. It was just a Thursday morning when the coastal air smelled a little sharper, the cafe felt quieter, and I realized I didn't feel nervous anymore. I felt ready. Because everything was set. The documents. The lawyer. The notices. The evidence trail. The financial traps they'd stepped into all by themselves. And one more thing they didn't realize. Ava and Chad had unknowingly given me the perfect opening. The moment they moved into my house, claiming it through implication instead of permission, they made themselves legally vulnerable. And when Chad registered his business at my address, that was the second nail in their coffin. The third nail came from their own arrogance. They left a trail of text messages, social media posts, and casual comments to friends that made it seem like I'd willingly given them access. All of it was false. All of it was provable. And all of it was going to be brought to light. The lawyer, Ruth, scheduled everything on the same day. Better to hit once and hit hard, she said. We'll file the property claim, asset protection injunction, unauthorized occupation complaint, and fraud inquiry simultaneously. No breathing room. I liked her style. I paid her double what she asked. That morning, the filings went out at 9:03 a.m. By 9:47, Ava called me. Dad, you need to answer. This is serious. Something's happening with the house. Did you do something? Please call me. I didn't answer. At 10:15, Chad called. You need to explain right now. The city council just reached out. Something about our business license being flagged? And the house, your house, our house, there's some kind of legal hold? What did you do? Call me back. I didn't answer that either. Instead, I sat outside the cafe with a cup of coffee Linda had insisted on comping today. No arguments. She sat with me, arms folded, watching the ocean. You look calm, she said. I am. You're not shaking. Not pacing. Not second-guessing. I smiled. I already did all that. Weeks ago. She nodded and patted my arm once. Good. You deserve this, Howard. By noon, the fallout began. Ruth called first. They've received all notices, she said, her voice steady but with the hint of a grin. They tried to reach me 5 times already. The county clerk's office is involved now. And, prepare yourself, their bank froze their joint account pending verification. I sat up. Already. When you register a business under a fraudulent address, certain systems move fast. And the house. Locked down. Legally frozen until the investigation concludes. They can't sell, rent, or claim primary residence. I took a long breath. Good. Thank you. Howard, she softened. Not many people get to stand up to their own family. You did it with grace. Grace wasn't exactly how I felt, but I appreciated the sentiment. Around 1:30, the real show began. A silver SUV I recognized from too many tense dinners pulled into the cafe's parking lot, crooked, like the driver's mind wasn't on the wheel. The doors opened in a rush, and there they were. Ava and Chad. They scanned the patio until they found me, sitting calmly with my coffee, a newspaper folded neatly at my side. Ava walked toward me first, fast, frantic, eyes wide and red like she'd been crying. Chad followed, jaw tight, phone in his hand like it was a weapon. Dad, Ava said breathlessly. Please, you can't just disappear and then do this to us. I looked up slowly. Do what exactly? She gestured wildly. The house. The business alerts. The legal papers. They're saying we're under investigation. You are, I said calmly. For occupying a property you don't own. And for fraudulent business registration. Chad's voice was sharp. You're acting insane. We moved into that house because you abandoned it. I didn't abandon anything, I replied. I left temporarily. And even if I hadn't, you still have no rights to enter, live in, or change locks on a house you don't own. Ava's lip trembled. We thought you didn't want it anymore. You thought, I corrected gently, that I wouldn't fight back. Chad scoffed. This is ridiculous. You're blowing everything out of proportion. If you needed space, you could have just said so. You didn't have to sabotage our life. I set my cup down. I didn't sabotage anything. I protected my life, my assets, my name. And the only reason this affects you is because you built everything you have on the assumption that I wouldn't look too closely. Ava shook her head. Dad, we're family. No, I said softly. Family cares. Family asks how you're doing before asking what you can give. Family doesn't try to access your bank account behind your back. Family doesn't move into your home the second you step out the door. She covered her mouth. I didn't. Dad, I didn't try to access your account. I have the login logs, I said. From the bank. I know the device. I know the zip code. I know it wasn't an accident. She went pale. Chad stepped forward, lowering his voice in what he likely thought was intimidation. You need to drop the complaints. All of them. Right now. Or we'll fight it. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The bravado. The certainty that he could talk anyone into anything. The belief that he was always the smartest man in the room. You're welcome to fight, I said. But you won't win. And why's that, he snapped. Because the house isn't in your name. Because the LLC you created is tied to my address, not yours. Because every dollar you spent in the last 6 months is traceable to a joint account you can't legally claim as separate property. And because every lawyer in the county can smell your desperation from a mile away. His nostrils flared. You think you can ruin us? No, I said gently. I think you ruined yourselves. Ava sank onto the patio chair across from me. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the version of her I'd loved all those years had been hiding underneath the hardened shell she'd worn recently. Dad, she whispered, why didn't you just tell me you were hurting? Why didn't you tell me you needed us? Because for years, I said quietly, you only asked what I could give. Not how I was doing. Not how I was coping. Not how I felt. She wiped her face. Can we fix this? Please. I looked at her hand. Her wedding ring caught the sunlight. Thin, delicate, expensive. I wanted to forgive her. But forgiveness wasn't supposed to be free. I leaned back. You can start by leaving the house. Immediately. My lawyer will coordinate with yours. Chad clenched his fists. You can't. I can't, I said. And I already did. And what? He growled. Do you want from us? I stood slowly. My legs didn't shake. My voice didn't tremble. I want you, I said calmly, to live with the consequences of how you treated me. Just as I lived with the consequences of believing you still saw me as family. Ava sobbed quietly into her hands. Chad glared, realizing he was losing control, losing the battle, losing access to everything he thought he could mine from me. You'll regret this, he hissed. I shook my head. No, I said softly. But you might. I walked past them, out of the cafe patio, down the sidewalk. Linda watched from the doorway, arms crossed, chin lifted, proud. As I turned the corner, my phone, my new phone, the one no one knew about, buzzed. It was Ruth. Everything's proceeding smoothly, she said. They'll be out of your house in 48 hours. The business registration is suspended, and the trust is protected. Nothing they do can touch you anymore. I inhaled deeply, exhaled slowly. Thank you, I said. After we hung up, I stood there for a long moment, staring at the horizon. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't alone. I wasn't trapped. I was free. And as the coastal wind brushed across my face, carrying the scent of salt and sunlight, I felt Marlene beside me, steady, warm, proud. I whispered into the breeze, I'm not useless. Then I walked home. The final line drifted through my mind, a quiet truth finally spoken. I didn't lose my family. I only lost the ones who were never truly mine.